All right. Let's welcome you back. It's our time to be free family to the next episode of Telling Our Inner Critic to Shut Up. So, in today's episode, guys, first of all, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please go ahead. And if you've been following along, and if you haven't been following along, check out the very first video in this series. I'm gonna try to link it either here or up here, and that way you can start from the beginning and watch the videos. Excuse me, and watch. I got notifications popping up here, but and watch the videos from the start, especially if you've been struggling with those inner thoughts, those negative thoughts that have been plaguing your mind. All right, because we're going to be talking about in this series how you can stop that inner critic. We're going to give you tips and tricks and exercises that you can do to stop that inner critic from plaguing you, from stopping you from moving forward in life. So in today's episode, guys, we're going to talk about proving these negative thoughts wrong by imagining the worst case scenario. All right, because our inner critic can be more than a pain. Can you agree? Can you agree with that? Our inner critic is more than a pain. And if you've been following along with me, you've probably discovered along our journey that our inner dialogue can really stop us in our tracks. Okay, it really, most of the time, it holds us back from the things that that we most desire in life, guys. And what it does is it preys on our fears and in hopes to make sure that we stay insecure with ourselves and keeps us from moving forward. So we want to be moving forward in life. We don't want to stay in the same spot, especially if we're unhappy. And it's always good to grow through that fear and keep moving forward so you can move on with your life. So you know, if there's a way that you can move forward, would you take that opportunity to move forward? Because when we think about our fears and we think about our insecurities, most of the time we don't think about what's the worst that could happen. We always immediately go to the bad case scenario. So what we want to do is, when we're fearful, think about what's the worst that could happen. What is the worst case scenario, that could happen? And so we're going to be diving into that. And we're going to be examining today, hopefully with the hopes that you'll discover that when we think about the worst case scenario, it's not as bad as we think. All right. So, a matter of fact, the worst case scenario can probably be your best friend against your inner critic. So, with that being said, we're going to talk about these scenarios, okay? All right, let's jump back into this, talking about the worst case scenario. Now, guys, the worst case scenario is usually some kind of exaggerated belief that we have about an outcome of any kind of situation. Say something, you feel like something may happen, and you come up with this scenario in your head that the worst thing can come from that situation. Let's say you upset someone and you think that, oh my God, they're not going to be friends with me anymore because I did this. That is usually the worst case scenario. Usually an apology will fix that. But the scenarios that we come up in our head is where the mind goes when there is uncertainty involved, fear. We are just fear of the unknown. We fear that this unknown situation is going to happen. Guys, fear of the unknown is so powerful. And in the worst case scenario, it plays upon that fear in very sneaky ways. Guys, the worst case scenario turns every potential outcome into some kind of catastrophe where there isn't any necessarily anything awful lurking about it at all. And oftentimes, guys, we turn these things into this big blow up that never even happens. And these things turn out more times than not. These things turn out to be just fine or not as bad as we thought they would be. So now, let's talk about how can it help you. Okay, when we're looking at these worst case scenarios, how can these worst case scenarios help you? All right, well, looking back on your past experiences, all right, with the worst case scenario, it's really a good exercise to start with. Okay, it lets you know that usually the absolute most awful thing you imagine never even occurred at all. So look back at your past experience, all right, and think of something that happened and you just went way overboard, thinking about the worst case scenario that could happen, and think about the outcome that actually happened. All right, think about that for a moment. All right, because you can use that knowledge right here in the present moment to use the worst case scenario to your advantage. Okay, the worst case scenario is usually playing in the background of your thoughts, but have you ever taken the time to confront it though? And when I say confront it, that means asking yourself, what's the worst that could happen? And then exploring that question can really give you some insight and perspective as to how it can help you with your most past fear or your anxiety. Guys, it helps you to stop that tape that's playing over and over in your brain. All right, and that's what we want. We want that constant scenario playing that plays over and over in our head. We want it to stop. Okay, we want those negative thoughts, because that's all it is negative thoughts. We think about the worst thing that can happen and we just replay this thing over and over and over in our head until it becomes a reality for us. You know, we stay stuck in that place. We don't want to do something because we're stuck playing that scenario over and over and over again. You know, so we've been talking about this worst case scenario and proving that worst case scenario wrong, because that's what this is all about. We want to prove that worst case scenario, that those thoughts of the worst case scenario, to be wrong. So how can we overcome this worst case scenario? Well, first of all, confronting the worst case scenario is the very first step to overcoming it. All right, asking this question puts you in this present moment, and it puts you into problem solving mode. All right, so you can begin to look at your situation analytically. All right, rather than through the lens of fear. Okay, because this gives you control, and we want to take our control back. This gives you control that was lacking in the first place when you allowed your thoughts to run wild, giving in to the worst case scenario of your imagination. So instead, you can now take the time to consider things like this, you know, and think about, what are the odds? What is the odds that this worst case scenario will happen? Would it actually happen, or would it be more likely not to happen? Okay, so put your brain in that analytical mode and think about your worst case scenario, and actually take the time, instead of immediately thinking that the worst case scenario will happen. Take that time, take that moment to ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? And will this really happen, or is my imagination just running wild? What are the odds of this worst thing happening? Once you have a handle on things, you can begin to move forward. Okay, so as you can see, guys, this worst case scenario thing, it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. It doesn't have to be the end of the world. You can actually use that worst case scenario to turn things around in your life and use it as a tool to actually push you forward to defeat your inner critic. All right, so That's what I have for you guys. Overcome that worst case scenario. Put yourself in that analytical mode. So that's what I have for you guys today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Again, if you did, go ahead and like this video. Subscribe if you haven't done so already so that you can catch the rest of the episodes when I upload them. Alright? So as I always say, it's our time to be free, and I want you to be free.